the ability to take feedback. This is a game changer because this is the one thing that allows you to reinvent yourself to handle unfair situations of increasing complexity. And the world is an unfair place. You cannot claw your way to the top of the top. In any culture in humanity, if your interest is greater, if self-interest is greater than the larger interest, the system will not allow you to progress. If you raise your heads for the wrong reason, the system will chop your head off. Not everyone will be successful, but a successful person can come from anywhere. If you join a great school or a great college, that is no guarantee that you are going to be a scholar or a topper. Most CEOs, and it's a heavy percentage, almost, I think 65 or 70% plus of CEOs come from the operations function. Now, the operations function is a generalist function.
My next guest on the 1% project is the remarkable Sawan Kapoor. Sawan is widely recognized as the career guy and India's foremost career coach. From his early days at Daymon Worldwide, the largest private label broker in the FMCG industry, to his rise as CEO of a multi-million dollar organization, Sawan's journey is marked by rapid progression and visionary leadership. His ability to navigate through challenging situations, like a sudden job loss in a foreign country, spurred him to develop a systematic approach to finding the perfect job fit, a methodology that he now teaches to guide thousands of professionals towards career success. In this episode, we deep dive into Sawan's life, extracting insights and wisdom that have the potential to reshape career journeys. Discover how Sawan's experiences have shaped his perspective on adversity, growth, and the art of career development. Subscribe to the show wherever you're listening to it, and sign up to the 1% Project's Think newsletter for curated content that adds value to your professional and personal development. Stay till the end, where I summarize the key takeaways from this conversation. We kick this off with Sawan, asking him about the history of career guidance and coaching.
There's been a lot of value to advice, especially if you look at ancient cultures. You look at dynasties, you look at rulers, they've all had that very coveted position in their the gem courtiers that has been the head of the month, somebody who dispels advice because of their maturity, their perspective, their life experiences, and their wisdom. I would think one of the earlier ones that comes to mind would be somebody like Chanakya, because he was able to see how a situation may possibly play out, advise his kingdom, advise his ruler, Chandragupta Maurya, on how to be able to take the appropriate steps to cater to self-interest and yet be a fair ruler who can expand the kingdom. So I think that would be fair to say that it's one of the more older examples of where coaching and advice, and specifically career coaching and how to develop and run a format of an enterprise, took shape. I'm sure if you go back in history, there are others as well, but that's one that in the context of India really stands out and comes to mind.
To add to that is Akbar and Birbal. Our parents teach us about their historic conversations or solving different things.
Certainly, yes.
So, how was early life? What were the values?
Early life was very pleasant, very blessed. I was born in a family where my grandfather had come from Peshawar in British India. There was no Pakistan at that time, but right at the time of partition, he was only school educated. He went to his father with the arzi to say that I want to go to college. And his father said, nothing doing. You have to get to work. We have to earn money and we have to feed ourselves. And that is where, through a connection, he found a government job. 6 months into working for the British Empire, he realized this is not something for him. At that point, he started looking for a private job and he found employment at this shop in Peshawar called Khyber Electricals. And that is where he learned how to wire a lamp and make the shade and things like that. And then post partition, when he came to India, that's the only trade he knew. So he would buy a stump of wood and carve it into a lamp and do the wiring. And my grandmother would stitch the shade and put the parchment paper and the translucent liniment oil and all of that. And by the evening, he would try to take it to the market and sell it. Some days he was able to sell it, some days he was not able to sell it. And then the government gave these tin shacks to a lot of refugees who had come in. They were Hindus and they had come back to India, which was Hindustan. On Panchkuya Road in Delhi, they got a little shack. That's where he set up the business with the name of Kapoor Lamps. And then one day there was an electrical short and that entire row of tin shacks burnt down. And then on the way back, he had an accident and he broke his arm. And by then he had 3 children. He has a total of 4 children, but by then he had 3 of his children. And he got a little depressed, and that's where they, as a couple, found the wherewithal in them to start again. Soon they were able to make their first store, which also happened to be on Pachkuya Road. And by then, some of his sons were coming of age and they started to join the business. This is the late 60s. And then came a progression as my father joined the business. He really grew that brand. 69 when my father joined, or almost 70 when my father joined, was Palika Bazaar, and then 73 was Janpat. The first outstation store for Kapoor Labs was in Chennai in 1974. And then from there, it started to spread. So Bangalore, Indore, Ludhiana, Calicut, Calcutta, Mumbai, it grew from there. By the time I came of age, I had a drive to prove myself. I failed my 12th. That was a little bit of a wake-up call. I was interested in everything that I should not be interested in and not really taking an interest in my education. There was a little bit of a rebel in me. I failed my 12th and I was going to a very good school. I was going to St. Columbus in Delhi, which is the same school for people like Shah Rukh Khan. But I did not do well in the 12th. I failed 3 out of 5 subjects and the school kicked me out naturally. Took some time and a fair bit of effort for my parents to find admission in another school for me. And I got admission in a school in Faridabad. I started to transform. I started to take my education more seriously. And I graduated with a fairly high percentage. And then after that, I was very clear I wanted to go abroad for my education. But my father was also very clear and he said that you're not mentally ready to go abroad. So we compromised and I found a twinning program where the first 2 years you do in India. And the first 2 years were at an institution called Christ College in Bangalore. The program was run by the American university, but it was being administered for the first 2 years at an Indian campus at a local university there. And then when I completed the first 2 years, I had seen a little more of life. My father felt that this was now much more appropriate. I was better prepared. Not that I did not give them trouble and enough surprises in that time as well. But I remember there was an episode where I was not going to classes again in college. The principal of the college sent a telegram to my parents that said, Sawan not attending classes. That's all it said. It had 4 words on it. And the next day morning, my mother is in doubt and saying, what is going on? They worked with a child that kept them up a fair bit of nights. But that is where I got progressively better. And then when I got to the United States, I really had an amazing group of friends. And with that good company, there was a fire that was lit in me. And I really got going. So I joined a business fraternity. I went for a study abroad program. I had 4 internships. I got involved in many co-curriculars. I was on the dean's list. I was attending now the honors college. And people had a hard time believing that this is the same kid. That sense of confidence and the pride that you feel when you are able to accomplish something that takes a fair bit of effort over a period of time, that dynamic really set in. Then when I graduated, I can tell you I had 8 job offers. On the evening of the 10th of September 2001, I had 8 job offers. And the next day, the terrorist attacks took place in New York and in Washington. The planes flew into the Twin Towers. And it was a very confusing time for that country. I'm not blaming anyone, but all of the offers were rescinded. And these were big companies like Heinz and Conagra and Hormel Foods and Kraft, Pepsi Bottling Group. They were all big brand name FMCG companies. Their policies changed overnight. I mean, it was a time of great confusion and the offers that I had were gone. So I actually went into a little bit of a depression, wondering all of the sacrifice and the money that my parents have invested and everything that I have done here, it's all vanishing in front of my eyes. And I'm going to have to go back home. After 2 weeks of feeling sorry for myself, I realized that if I don't get up and do something, nothing is going to change. I remember I used to come back to my dorm room after classes in the afternoon at about 3 o'clock, and I would start walking up and down my dorm room. And it was a small room. It must have been maybe 12 feet by 8 feet with a small bathroom attached. And I would be walking up and down this room. And the next time I'd look at the watch, it was 11 at night. So from 3 to 11, I'd be walking, just overthinking and not knowing, facing the uncertainty of what might happen. But then I got out of that and I started doing everything that I could do in an individual capacity. So I reached out to every professor. I reached out to all of the career counselors on campus. I reached out to everybody in my network in the hope that somebody will be able to connect me with an organization. Because at that time, for a student of brown color skin, it was very difficult even to get an interview because policies across the board had been changed by so many companies. I remember there was this professor of mine, a very dear professor of mine that I'm still connected with. His name is Dr. Frank Gambino, and he was instrumental. You find these teachers that really know what to do with you in their loving and capable hands. Somebody I have a lot of regard for. This man stepped in. When he stepped in, he helped me get an interview with this company by the name of Daymon Associates. They were the largest private label brokers on the planet, and they were working across 2, 3 countries at that time. They were working with 100+ retailers developing their private label programs. And I went for the interview. I was very nervous, but I was also grateful that I finally had an interview after 2 months of facing this anxiety. And the interview went really well. And a week later, they called me for a second interview. So I remember I had to hire a car and drive to that location, which was about an hour away. And I went there for the second interview, and the second interview went even better. And they landed up making me an offer. And 2 weeks before I graduated, before the actual graduation ceremony, I had the offer in hand and I had filed for an express visa because I needed that approval to continue to stay in the country. One evening before, when I was to take the flight, if I don't get that approval letter, I would have to take the flight back to India. One evening before I got the approval from what was known as the Citizenship and Immigration Service of the United States, and I was able to stay back. Then the following month, I came back to have my visa stamped and everything, and then I started with them.
Oh, that is a brilliant hero's journey. It's a movie.
It was a lot of fun. If you're asking why I chose to work for someone else, it came from wanting to make it on my own. I was very driven by what my father had been able to make of himself and what my grandfather had been able to make of himself. It came from that I have something in me. I, of course, did not understand my place in the world at that point. Like many, I was a hot-blooded young man with a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. So I think it was all of that I was able to turn into fuel appropriately, given the influences that I got in my life, and be able to use them to be able to serve appropriately. It worked out. It takes a village to raise a child. And I just feel, looking back, that I was very blessed. I had a very appropriate village of associates and friends and family and network around.
You talked about friends. Christ College. I have studied in RV in Bangalore, so I know Christ. It's a brilliant school. And you're absolutely right. More than the education at RV, my friends pushed me to where I am today. As college goers, we don't realize those relationships, those friendships last long. Even today, all those friends, it's 20 odd years, we almost regularly talk. And in different parts of the world, network is one of the most valuable asset we accumulate as we go ahead.
Yes. And the same with my group of college friends. They're spread all over the world, but that is the one group on WhatsApp that is buzzing with everything from maskari and to, people meeting up and catching up and helping each other out in life situations. And they're a really bright group of individuals. Some are leading companies. My roommate from college was this guy from Sweden, and he is now the chief financial officer of Scania Group, which is the largest builder of trucks and buses in the world. Like this, there's a whole cohort of friends that have been very supportive and very welcoming throughout the journey of life so far.
So from your first job in the US, you scaled that to becoming a CEO of an organization. How did you plan that? Because you were young. At your age, back then, people don't have a lot of bearing. They're still figuring out things. So how did you traverse that? How did you plan?
As much as I'd like to take credit for it, I was very much like what you described. I was still figuring things out. Something really changed when I was working at Daymon. They sent me for this training. And this was a training with the Jack Canfield. I can tell you that the highest potential managers in the company, it was a big company. There were almost, at that time, maybe 20,000 plus employees. That grew in my tenure from 20,000 to almost 50,000. But at that point, the top 50 managers were identified as high potentials. And I was told, you have to go for this training. I've never been to a personal development training. I don't know what they're going to do there. I'll have to take circles around a fire and marry myself, or I don't know what goes on at events like this. I'm not comfortable. I have a lot of work and this work is urgent. And my boss at the time, he told me, Sawan, you're not really listening. You're not being given a choice. You have to go. And I'll tell you, it was one of the most fortunate things that happened to me because when I went for this training, it was a 7-day long, super intensive training. Talking in the year back in 2003, that 1 week really rebooted. It was like somebody for the first time had switched off the CPU and rebooted it and defragged the memory and removed all of the viruses and really given me an anchored direction in what I was supposed to do and how I should live, learning from the experiences of others because life's too short to experience all by yourself. So that was a milestone in my life that I really value. And then after I had been for it, I became addicted. I went back for the advanced course. I paid money by myself and I went back for the advanced course. And then after that, I, started going to multiple other personal development trainings. It started a natural progression in how I would be able to plan for what is coming ahead in life. And I think that one factor played a very big role in me being able to accelerate my corporate journey. The second thing that happened that I was able to connect as I went through this process of engaging with personal development was that as a child from the 6th grade on, I was bullied very heavily in school. I was not popular and I was bullied very heavily. And it was nothing but an ego based fight over some rock star's poster with a friend. There was only one last piece left, and I was the one who got to the shop first and bought it and denied him the chance to buy it. And that turned into a 6-year nightmare where I would be going to school and I would, have this vision that I hope something happens and I don't have to be in school today. It was that bad for me. Even though I had people to talk to, nobody was really listening. Nobody intervened in that capacity that they should have. But because of that, I started taking a tremendous interest in learning because I felt that when I know different subjects, I can speak well about them. And I wanted to be very accurate in what came out of my mouth because I didn't want to be ridiculed for it. And that really created a lifelong learner kind of an attitude where I went on to read very heavily. All of that accumulation of knowledge, I feel knowledge never goes waste. All of that began to compound in a manner that led to this accelerated journey. I also remember that there was a time when I was in my first or second assignment, my job became very travel heavy. So I was taking 3-4 flights a week, and that was my pattern for several years. Before that happened, I had saved a salary for 3-4 months to buy a television. Because when I first started working, the only things in my apartment were a mattress, a chair that you needed to blow air into to fill it up. I remember there was always a 6-pack in the fridge. That was my apartment. So I'd saved up money to buy this Sony television. And the first time that I moved, the movers broke the TV and it was insured. So I collected the insurance, but my travel had picked up so much that I never bought a TV again. And I was always going through airports and bookstores and all of that. So I developed a voracious habit to read. And at this point, I think it's probably somewhere around 2,500 or 3,000 books or something like that. You can't see that far out, but all of this kind of came together as a perfect storm to help me be where I am. And life had to play out in this sequence for me to experience the reality that is there today.
How important is it to invest in yourself in programs and education? How important is that?
I think it is incredibly important. Of course, there are programs where the program is marketed better than the substance that it holds. So it puts the burden back on the individual that is going for the program. You can't just fall for the marketing. You also have to see beyond that. And that is where a coach really has to earn the right in your eyes. But this is the one thing that allowed me to accelerate the journey because it brings in perspective that otherwise you would take decades to accumulate through experimentation and hit and trial. A lot of people will come to a coaching program and they will say, wow, it costs this much money. That's too expensive. What you're really saying in that moment is that I am not worth it. Because what you need to understand is that when you get structured learning from someone who has, walked the journey before you, the kind of acceleration you're going to achieve is something that is outside of your experience. You can appreciate it, but you cannot fully understand it. A journey that should take a few months lands up taking decades for people because they resist spending that money, or they have some other excuse that will block them from that knowledge coming into their awareness. And therefore, the process of compounding on that knowledge will never begin.
In 2013, you came back to India, joined your family business. I'm assuming you reorged it, you resettled it, you made it into a growth machine, and then chose to become a career coach. How was that journey from a transition from setting up the business, your family business, and then becoming a career coach? Because as you had mentioned in your classes, that there are a number of people who join your class just to get the material to become a career coach.
On last count, it was over 150 different career coaches that had come into, in India, you get this, now the content mil jaye kahin, so I should be able to get the content. But I suppose when somebody tries to copy you, it's the highest form of a compliment, it's flattery. But you can't really copy the specifics of my journey, or the heart of service from where one comes. But I can tell you that was a very difficult time. I had achieved a level of income and a level of life there in the United States that was not easy to say goodbye to. My wife wanted to come back to India, and I could see her reasons. We had our son by then, wanting to give him an Indian upbringing, wanting to have the larger family around us was something that was very important to her. It was difficult because I was probably in the 0.01% of the population at the level of success and the level of income that I was enjoying there. That said, you can't really prepare for it because the India that I left and the India that I came back to were two very different countries. And when I came back, it was like culture shock in reverse. I had been promised all of the support, but in reality, when I got here to the ground, there was not nearly that level of support. There was a lot of disturbance that I experienced at that time because my ways of working were also very American. You know, what my company people and the inner circle of members was telling me in how I should conduct myself, I was no way going to act in that manner. I couldn't do what I wanted to do. So I was in limbo, not knowing how to do what needed to be done. And it took me a little bit of time to reacclimatize to the system. I would say it took me a good couple years. And in that time, there were many instances where I would curse myself and say, what did I do? Why did I come back? The business needed a fair bit of funding, and to be able to put that into to reorganize it to that level was a crazy effort. Fortunately, I was, again, by the grace of God and by the good advice of the people around me, and having just a fantastic team. It's an old business, so people who are there and who know the business really know the business. But of course, the times were changing. Technology, marketing, finance, all of these things were changing in a very rapid way. So to be able to make use of where the world was going and what was available as tools, there was a lot of strategic thought that needed to be put in place and money that needed to be invested to build those solutions. Thankfully, I was able to do so, and that was a lot of fun. That was just a lot of fun. So 2 years of such hard struggle where I remember I would go back home and I've just sold something, another property to put back into the business. And my wife is looking at me and saying, what wrong have my children done to you? Why are you liquidating their inheritance? At the same time, it was one failure after another. And there were 9, 10 consecutive. So I was losing credibility very quickly. So the next time I would propose something to my family, to my wife, and say that I think this is the right step, she would say, enough. You need to be right just once. And that 10th time played out very correctly. But to have that wherewithal to go through those 9 times of consecutive failures, oh, it was the most trying time of my life.
You have probably trained thousands of individuals across age groups, right, to transform their careers. How does one design their career?
A career has to be positioned on the premise of giving extreme value, especially if you're ambitious and you want to achieve exceptional success in your career. How to choose your career or how to choose your career path. There are tools, there are assessments. You have to recognize today that you're not going to find people that are meant for one field and one career alone for the entirety of their lives. Today, people are multi-potentialites. This has to be acknowledged. For a certain segment of your life, you're going to do something for, let's say, a 5, 7, 10 years, and then you may want to move on to something else, something totally unrelated and very different. But the fundamentals remain the same. The underlying evergreen classics, if you will, understanding your ikigai at that point in your life, setting up the right goals, those processes remain the same. Careers that achieve exceptional success, they have some common elements. So if you ask me how to design the right career, it has to show you these things coming up. The first thing is finding the right fit. And the right fit is where what you have is of extreme value and solves the needs, the extraordinary needs that an organization has. So it doesn't matter what industry you're in or what business function you're involved with, or whether you are entry level or mid level or senior level, or what company you work for. You have to provide that irresistible value. So for that, you have to find the right fit. And that right fit is not just a competency fit in terms of you can deliver the actual outcomes to the organization, but it is also that the environment of the organization should be one where you fit well. When you find these two factors, then the other factors like work-life balance and growth opportunities, all of those things will figure themselves out. But you have to find these fundamental factors. So finding the right fit is one thing that is very important. The second thing is understanding your own value. And your own value is based on the value that you're going to provide to that organization. So you have to fundamentally understand how is value generated in the company. Who is successful here and why is a very good question to ask. Once you begin to understand that, or who was, you may be joining a company that's a turnaround or a realignment situation. But understanding that is very important. And then being able to translate that knowledge rapidly into action. The third thing is you have to practice a very different type of leadership because you cannot claw your way to the top of the company. In any culture in humanity, if your interest is greater, if self-interest is greater than the larger interest, the system will not allow you to progress. If you raise your heads for the wrong reason, the system will chop your head off. Leaders have this fundamental understanding that you cannot claw your way to the top of the company. You have to be carried there by other people. Other people must want you to be the leader for who you are as a human being. So you have to have a tremendous amount of altruism, a tremendous amount of benevolence in how you lead and manage. The fourth thing is, this is a big one because I find a lot of my students running into this problem. It's called the permission paradox. You cannot get the job without having the experience, and you cannot get the experience without first getting the job. And it becomes a major limitation for so many talented professionals. Now, there is a whole custom mix of career strategies, some direct strategies and some implied strategies that I use on a case-by-case basis to help professionals break through this barrier. They then know how to create that environment of support that will allow them to break through this problem. And the fifth one is Pareto's principle, which is the 20-80 rule. 20% of your work is going to create 80% of the impact, and 80% is only going to create 20% of the impact. So understanding what the core of that 20% is, and usually it is that 20% that is most deeply connected to the financial statements of the company. Now that's something that you cannot delegate or outsource. You cannot hand it off to your team. That's something that you're going to have to master yourself. So when you find these patterns coming up in your career, then rest assured you're designing your career appropriately. And you see why these 5 patterns and not something else like empathy or communication skills or another attribute. Because this is the value of a career coach. When you are able to look thousands and lakhs of careers, your ability to pick up patterns from them in what creates success, because success leaves clues. Success has a very solid foundation. And there are patterns to be understood from that data. So when you're able to see that is what puts you in a position to be able to guide others.
That brings me to a very obvious question. How to find the right career coach?
The coach has to be able to earn the right in your eyes. And that's a subjective statement. So to quantify it, here is what I look for. 1, they must have demonstrated that success themselves. They must be able to replicate that success unquestionably for multiple case studies and students. Not everyone will be successful, but a successful person can come from anywhere. If you join a great school or a great college, that is no guarantee that you are going to be a scholar or a topper. You've just gotten entry to the game. The way you play the game is the other half of the equation. That such a system is making that level of success possible. That is one thing that I look for. The second thing that I look for is that there must be something original to the system or the methodology or what that coach is preaching. It cannot just be repackaged information. It has to be original content of leading thought. It must be relevant in the world of today. And the third thing that I look for is the actual connect and the vibe with the coach. If you don't resonate with the energy, you will not be able to sustain that coaching relationship, because a coach is not a paid best friend. They are not there to patronize you. They are there to help you see the limitations that are holding you back. And then they have the process to be able to move you past those limitations. It requires the ability to be very comfortable with being uncomfortable. And if your ego is not in check, then when you are asked to be, to be introspecting in that manner, you will fight it. So it's a person that you can love on some days, and it's a person that you can hate on some days, because they are bringing that mirror, they are bringing that tough love to your life. So these are the things that I look for. And when I find them, because I'll tell you, a coach that doesn't have a coach is not a coach. They are a hypocrite. We are all works in progress. Sometimes we mistakenly think that we are finished products. We are never finished products. There are people and coaches that I learned from. The last program that I went for was about 3, maybe 4 years ago. This was a very deep program. It was all about consciousness, and it was all about working with extreme trauma, people who have gone through an extreme level of physical or sexual or mental abuse, and how to be able to deal with those situations. It's taken me almost 4 years to integrate those lessons into my life. Now, the person who runs that program, she runs a bigger program, which is a 28-day program that I'm dying to go for. But when I'm going to find 28 days in my life, because it's a residential style program, it's in California, there's a significant cost to it and a significant timeline to it. But I've scheduled it for at some point in later 2024 or early 2025, because we have to keep learning, because that's the only way we can reinvent ourselves for what is coming up. You can't parent the same way today, because, the goalpost is moving. It's a very different way. It's a very different world. So yes, some of the underlying lessons will be evergreen, like honesty is something that everybody should practice. Hard work, there is no replacement for. But what are you going to work hard towards? That goalpost is moving. These are the things that I look for in a coach. And when I find them, then my surrender is 100%.
One thing you overemphasize while you're teaching is surrendering 100%. Can you double click on that? Why is it important? What does that really mean?
The more senior you are, the harder you will be to coach. Because people, especially who have experienced some level of success in their life, by default, intellectual arrogance begins to set in, where they feel they know better. But the best way to break through that is to check with your reality. If the success is not showing up in your reality and you're living in this illusion that you know better, then there is a disconnect between what you're actually experiencing and who you think you are. The reason I ask for surrender is there are 2 reasons. One, it is going to make your implementation easier. It's not for me, it's for you. It's not that my ego is demanding that you must surrender to me. That's not the reason at all. When you surrender, you are going to be much more receptive to what I have to say or what any coach has to say. And thereby you will proceed in a manner where you will implement it with much more sincerity. The second reason I ask for surrender is because I'm only asking for something that I had to give myself. So I have earned the right to ask for it. Because this chain of links that connects teachers and students, it's an unbroken chain. Every teacher was at one point a student. Every master was at one point a disaster. If you go deeper into this sentiment, it's very important to bring that to the table. Because if you keep second guessing, then you're neither here nor there. That is why it is so important to check that vibe with the coach that you're selecting. If you match that vibe, and if you know that you can work with them not only on your good days, but even on the bad days, then you found somebody who can really make an impact in your life.
Which is one advice from your career coaches that has stuck with you?
I think the number one advice that I have received from people who are far smarter and far more learned than me is the ability to take feedback. This is a game changer. because this is the one thing that allows you to reinvent yourself to handle unfair situations of increasing complexity. And the world is an unfair place. Let's not be naive and say that the world is lovely and everything is rosy and hunky dory. Of course, we look for good in the world, and most people are decent, honest people. I'm not trying to take away from that premise, but bad things can happen to good people. Let's be street smart about it. And when you are able to increase that muscle that is able to solve problems of complexity that are unfair to begin with, that is what builds work. That is what it's who you become. It's not the goal that you achieve, it's who you become in that process. That is the real prize. So, the one piece of advice I would say is the ability to take feedback, because it allows you to reinvent yourself. And this is the problem with personal development. What you are trying to understand is something that is fundamentally outside of your experience. And it is very easy to intellectually comprehend it, but it is very difficult to fully understand. Now, if you have climbed a small hill, you know that climbing a hill, you're going to be out of breath. You might experience some joint pain. You're going to sweat. But if you have not climbed Mount Everest, then you don't know the intensity at which it can play out. Because when you're in the death zone above 26,000 feet, where your body is eating itself, fluid is filling up in your lungs and your brain, and you can't think straight and you have to take life or death decisions, the dynamic is entirely different. Now, you can understand it, but if you haven't been through it yourself, you cannot fully appreciate what happens in that moment. And the way you deal with difficulty is the best predictor of your capacity for success. So I think this is a real game changer, the ability to take feedback. And that is something that goes to the heart of how coachable someone is. So when I onboard people, I test this. I have multiple ways to test this. I'll poke a finger to see how coachable someone is. And if they are coachable, only then I will take on them.
They're genuine career coaches who would like to start a career in this space, as you did a few years ago as a business. Where would you direct someone who wants to start off?
Wow. Okay. So see, now that as a question is today, one of the terms that I find in the market is I'm a mid-career coach. There are a lot of these mid-career coaches, and a lot of them joined my program as well for grabbing content and trying to do giving it a different marketing spin and trying to do what we do. But fundamentally, you have to understand you cannot give what you don't have. Somebody with 10 years of experience who made it to the position of a senior manager or a vice president, you can't coach somebody who's going for a CEO role. You haven't seen that journey. Nobody is going to give you the medal for climbing only half the mountain. So if you're a mid-career coach and you know the mid-career journey really well, the problem is you may be leading them down a path that falls into the valley. It's not taking you to the top of the mountain because you haven't experienced that part of the journey. I think it has to be taken with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because the marketing in today's world and what is happening in the coaching industry is very seductive. People who may not be able to find a resonance with a conventional career are starting to see this as a choice. And yes, for many people, it will be an appropriate choice. But for many people, it will also not be an appropriate choice. So that is very important. And you have to understand that the ability to coach is only one element of being able to become a good or successful career coach. The ability to market yourself and fill your rooms is an entirely different skill set. And a lot of people go into this business thinking that they are great coaches, they are people's persons, and they can connect really well with an individual. All of that might be true. It's saying, I cook really great food, so I should open a restaurant. Now, if you're a restaurant owner, you're going to have to do the books, you're going to have to do the staffing, you're going to have to deal with the MCDs and the corporation of the city and the parking laws and all of that. You're going to have to manage your ingredient cost and your sourcing. You're going to have to train that staff, which is unreliable and may not show up at the time of your peak hours. Are you willing to do all of that? And I call this paying the price for your success, because you have to fundamentally understand that there is a lot of what you will be doing that you don't enjoy. And if you don't get good even at the things that you don't enjoy, you won't get to do the things that you really do enjoy. Walk into any of these things with open eyes. Okay. Don't just jump into it blindly, because there are many parts to this puzzle. and you will have to fill all of the parts. If you don't get all of these parts, you won't get the outcome, which is a scalable coaching business. So the ability to coach, learning how to fill your rooms, how to market, how to create traffic, all of these things are important. And if you get all of them, you will land up making a big impact and helping a lot of people who need your services.
How do you make career coaching a generational business? You are the asset. Your knowledge is actually being percolated. How do you make something which goes across generation, grows beyond you?
This is a problem that all physical face driven brands have, where the brand is a person. How do you take a Shah Rukh Khan and help others become a Shah Rukh Khan? In the coaching industry, it can be done, but it's not easy. And that is why you have to build with an exit strategy in mind. My favorite example is actually comes from the wine business. There was this gentleman by the name of Robert Parker. And Robert Parker at one time was probably the most influential critic, no matter what the subject was in the world. He is known as the emperor of wine. Now, this guy was trained as a lawyer. He was working for an insurance company, and his girlfriend at the time had a study abroad program in France, and she went over to France. While they were there, they were high school sweethearts. At that time, she went over to France and he followed. He was so lovelorn. He followed and he wanted to spend some time with her in France. And they traveled the countryside and they visited many vineyards and sampled a lot of wine. And he found that he has a supreme palate. His ability to pick up the nuances and the flavors in wine was exceptional. And he just fell in love with wine. Of course, he finished his education as a lawyer and joined this insurance company, and he worked there for a few years. And he said, this is not meaningful to me. This is not what I want to do. And on the side, he was catering to his passion of wine. At one point, he started a newsletter called The Wine Advocate. And this was a black and white publication that he would write up. So he would put in his own money. He would travel to France, travel to Italy, travel to all of the winemaking countries, and he would sample the wines and he would write about these wines before they came to the market. And the year that changed his fortunes was 1982. 1982 was an exceptional vintage in the world of wines. He went to Bordeaux and he sampled all of these famous chateaus and vineyards. And he came back and he wrote about them before they came to the market. And he said, they are going to be phenomenal wines and they're going to be age worthy like you cannot imagine. And every other critic went against the grain and said, this is not true. And when the wines came out, they were truly spectacular. 1982 was one of the vintages of the century. You know, that really enhanced his credibility. And the way he spread from there on was a story and a journey in itself. He was a business where it was his palate's ability to be able to understand how beautiful that wine is. Now, that is not easy to give to someone else. But he recently retired and he sold the business to the Michelin Group, the tire making company. The Michelin Group also runs the Michelin Guide, which is the restaurant guide of 3-star Michelin restaurants. He sold the business and I think it went for some $50 million or something like that. But from the publication itself, he was probably earning something 3 million a year. He was a very well-to-do man who had worked very hard to, build his reputation and build this business. And it was a black and white publication. He never took any advertisements because he wanted to fiercely maintain his independence. He never wanted to be a business that is giving advice on the basis of taking money from someone and favoring them. This is what influencers are doing today. So they build influence and then they go brand hunting and who's going to pay me, whose headphones should I wear and whose sunglasses should I put on to be able to make money. So he maintained his independence. And that's one of the most brilliant examples that I saw in how he built that business. And then he built a second line of defense, which takes time. He identified other people who had a super palate and he worked with them tirelessly for years to create the Robert Parker and the Wine Advocate brand. And that brand had become so well entrenched. The advice is so looked forward to by connoisseurs in that industry that the worth that was assessed for it was millions of dollars and he was able to pass it on. That is why when we get started, we are all brands like a Sawan Kapoor or any other coach. And then we start giving prominence to the actual brand. Like in my case, it is Apex. accelerated professional excellence in X. So where X is any career or any industry or any function or field, that natural transition will take place. Right now, I still have at least a decade or a decade and a half in front of me before I have to worry about those things. But I'm designing it in a manner where if it continues to stay meaningful, then it can continue to serve people who will need this.
Just to add to Michelin, the Michelin Guide was actually one of the very first content marketing stunt. They actually wrote the book, or basically the Michelin Guide concept came up because people would use their cars to go to different restaurants.
Right.
That's how the tires will wear out
Right.
and they would buy new tires.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And now the ownership is in your part of the world in Hong Kong.
As a career coach, how do you see being a generalist versus a specialist?
I think this goes in cycles. There are times where a generalist is preferred, and then there are times when the world's favor changes to specialists. When new deep industries open up, then of course you need special expertise in those industries because they are yet taking shape. And once they become more part of the normal, then you go back to generalism. So I think it comes and goes in cycles. But in general, if I had to pick one, I would pick generalist all the way. And the reason for that is if you look at most CEOs, and it's a heavy percentage, almost, I think 65 or 70% plus of CEOs come from the operations function. Now, the operations function is a generalist function. See, the nature of the problem that is going to come and hit you is not just going to be from IT. It's not just going to be from sales. It's going to be a mix. And if you look at what people who build great careers have in common, one of those things that you see is that regardless of the nature of the problem, they have the methodology to be able to engage and solve the problem. So I personally think that there was a time, especially when we saw the IT boom, there was a time where everybody felt that if you're going to meet Jesus Christ, it's going to be in IT. Or every Indian father who sends their son to the United States wants them to become an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer, right? And every doctor and lawyer's father wants the son to become an industrialist. So this all plays out in cycles. But if I was to pick one, I would think it's generalist all the way. Because a generalist has that underlying framework to be able to take whatever the problem is and bring a solution to it. And part of that solution may be assembling a team of specialists.
What is your counterintuitive insight about career coaching?
I think we touched upon it a little bit. One that has to deal with people who have that intellectual arrogance. And the more senior you are, the harder you will be to coach. And it is fundamentally because that's the problem with personal development, things that lie outside of your experience. And that is where you ask for surrender. Because the surrender is not for the coach. The surrender is to make your own journey easy. It can be a love-hate relationship. Your ability to take the U-turn in your life is very important. If you made a mistake, if you can't take that U-turn, then you're already in a hole and you're not letting go of the shovel. You're digging it deeper. That's why today the world does not have an information problem. The world has an implementation problem. The way technology now pervades humanity, it has really democratized information. Of course, the quality of that information is still on the burden of the receiver. They have to sift through what is really valuable and what is not. Just because you have a voice today doesn't mean what you have to say has substance. Saying something and saying anything, there is a big difference between the two. So that still has to be understood. But fundamentally, I think this is what is really counterintuitive about coaching. You have to deal with people who are so deeply married to their dysfunction. People don't understand when you just say it in words. You know what to do to lose weight. You have to diet and you have to exercise, right? But put chola bhaturas and gulab jamuns in front of you and all of that knowledge goes out the window. So that's the problem. In a classroom, the lesson comes first and the test comes afterwards. But in life, the test comes first and the lesson is delivered afterwards. So if you can beat that dynamic of what life is demanding from you at that moment, then you're well ahead of the curve. Because if you look at it this way, when we are young, we have time and we have energy, but we don't have a lot of money. And when we come to our middle age, we don't have the time. We've gotten incredibly busy. We have a little bit of money and we certainly have the energy. And when we get to our old age, then we don't have the energy left, but now we have the time and we have probably significant money. So the stage of life is going to ask for something from you. And your personal development is what allows you to build that muscle where you are ahead of what that stage of life is going to demand from you. And if you're able to do that, then you have been a lifelong learner in an appropriate way. But it's all counterintuitive because by the time the son realizes that what the father was saying was right, he has a son who misunderstands him.
Brilliant. Love that. 3 books or blogs that have influenced you the most.
One book that I would recommend is a book called Ishmael, Ishmael. It was written by this Australian author by the name of Daniel D. Quinn. And fundamentally, the question that he is asking is how man should live, how humanity should live their life. This book was almost 40 years in writing before it came out in its first draft. And I won't spoil the takeaway of the book. It's a brilliant book to read. I read it, I think, in my third year of college, and I try to read it every couple to 3 years because it's just such an impactful read. Another thing that I would recommend is the work of Dr. John D. Martini. I think he's one of the most amazing individuals who understands human behavior in a way that seldom people ever will. If you can engage with his work, it is absolutely brilliant. And a third book that made such a strong impression. I remember Jack Welch's story, Straight from the Gut, had a very big impact on me and his tenure at GE. What he took over as unprofitable, huge behemoth of a company and how he took it to the largest market capitalization in the world. That was a very impactful read. A second very impactful read was Good to Great by Jim Collins. So these would be some things that I would recommend.
Advice to a younger self.
Do more, care less about opinions, and develop better relationships. I had an accelerated journey, but comparison is the ultimate thief of joy and peace. I'm also human, and sometimes when I look back and I compare, what I should have done, there is a certain amount of regret that comes up when I say, you know what, I could have done that better, I could have done this better, and I could have done that better. And that is where the six-pack in the fridge helps. I'm not trying to promote drinking at all, by the way.
Sawan, that was a great conversation. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Pritish, for having me. It was very nice to have you in the room when you went through the program, and all the very best. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Here are the key takeaways. Number 1. By acknowledging setbacks as stepping stones and embracing challenges as opportunities, one can navigate the journey with purpose. Seeking mentorship, adopting a strategic mindset, and staying committed to personal development can lead to overcoming obstacles and achieving remarkable outcomes. Number 2. Designing a successful career involves several key steps. Number 1. It's vital to identify the right fit for one's skills and values within an organization. Number 2. Understanding one's value proposition in terms of the value one can provide to the organization is crucial. And number 3. A different type of leadership that prioritizes altruism and benevolence is essential for career growth. And the last insight. It's important to choose a coach who has demonstrated success and proven results through their methodology with multiple case studies. A coach should have originality in their approach and the relevance of their content to the contemporary world. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who will find it valuable. For any recommendations and feedback, you can drop me a line at pritish@1%.live. Email is in the show notes. Until next time.